Now it's crazy. It's March 25th today, and we had 6 inches of snow yesterday. So we were thinking about spring frost seeding, which I already have with clover and switchgrass. And I've even sprayed simazine, which is great because that's soaking into the ground right now really well. But to think about planting spring plots right now is just crazy because of all the snow we have. And we had thunder showers today. So it's just a weird time of the year. It's been a weird year. We need the moisture bad, and you probably do too in a lot of your areas. But I wanted to talk about what's the best spring planting to plant. Food plotters, it's like we're farmers, or we want to be like farmers. Farmers need to plant their corn and beans and hay with a cover crop in the springtime. So we need to do the same, right? Everyone's planting in the spring. Spring's when you plant. It's when you plant trees. Best time to plant trees, shrubs, fruit trees. But is it really the best time to plant food plots? And what should you plant? I want to talk about some different food types and that just come to my mind. And we'll have an overall theme with this, but I'll talk about clover. Now, clover is not a bad one to plant in the spring. Clover as a summer crop, and a lot of these, if they're spring planted, they're summer crops, most of them. When you're planting clover in the spring, not a bad idea, but you want to make sure you plant it on soils that have already been weed controlled. I love frost seeding clover because frost seeding is implying that you already have an established clover base from the previous year. I love to establish clover in the fall. Best time by far to plant clover because weeds are dying in the fall. Moisture is only increasing. You get another shot of moisture in the spring. Clover gets its roots established, and the worst drought is very hard to kill clover the following summer when it's been fall established. And that's why frost seeding clover to fill in spots is great in the spring, because you can fight off those effects of the drought with the previous clover that was planted. We use a certain percentage of chicory in there, not because an additional forage, it's a little bit of that, but because it's a great nurse crop for clover at a certain percentage. Learned that a long time ago. Areas that didn't have chicory were half as high in volume. Areas that had chicory were twice as high in volume. Planted on strips side by side. Learned that 20 years ago or more. So it's all about protecting that clover going into the summer. But clover, if you have too many deer on your property and you have 5 acres of food plots and you plant 4 acres of clover, that could be a very bad thing because you're putting a lot of does and fawns on that clover all summer long, and they're only hanging around during the fall waiting for your fall crops to arrive. And clover, unless you're down in that southern Indiana, Illinois, northern Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, over into Missouri, unless you're southern Pennsylvania, unless you're in that line, then clover in November is really not that appreciable. I love clover on small hunting plots. Here we have about 17 and a half acres of plots, and we'll have about 1.5 acres to 1.75 acres of clover. They're on small hunting plot areas where it's just a pass-through. Deer recognize that they're there during the fall, but it's not their food, or during the summer, and they'll come back in the fall, but it's not their main food source during the summertime. It's just a pass-through. Those bucks that pass through and recognize that food often come back during the fall for a shot on that hunting plot. So it's just establishing a pass-through. Great for clover, great for turkeys in the spring, great area. So help set up your turkey plots. It's great for a back corner. Put a camera on it, see what's passing through there. It gives you a really good inventory of what you might be using. We have one area I'm thinking of that's probably 1/10 of an acre clover next to a 4.5 acre food plot. And it's just a pass-through. That'll tell us a lot about what bucks are using that food plot this year, that big food plot, without having 8 cameras around the food plot to know where they're coming in and out. But it can hurt you during the summer. Clover can. Think about that. Why it can hurt you. Too many does, too many fawns. They stick around during the fall. They take up space. And it really is a thing. There's always a balance. If there's no does and fawns, it's not an attractive property to begin with during the fall. So you have to have a balance. But as you find, once you pass that balance, the more does you have, the fewer bucks you have. Beans. Beans to me are, if you have low deer numbers, you want to raise your deer numbers. Same with clover. Plant all clover. I used to have all clover growing in my property in the UP of Michigan, because the clover, I'd still have to mow it 3 times during the summer. The deer didn't hit that well, but it kept does and fawns around, which meant they were there during the fall. It helped me push my numbers up. It was a numbers increasing area. Beans, same thing. If you can get beans to stand during the summertime, awesome. Because you can push your deer numbers up. Those does and fawns that are there during the summertime are there to stay, and they'll be back during the fall. They'll just stay on your property if you have that fall food source too. Problem with beans in some areas, they're eating down, most areas are eating down to the dirt before the season begins. You fence them off. Maybe you let them come in late November, December. Well, you miss the bulk of the deer herd, the deer harvest time. I heard someone say, I love my beans because I hunt every December deer muzzleloader. It's my favorite time to hunt. Well, you're just hunting leftovers. I want to be able to one that dictates what I hunt and what I shoot. If there's old bucks in the neighborhood, I want them to die on my land, not someone else's. So I don't want to wait till December to hunt. That's a very bad strategy. Beans can sometimes be incorporated in that strategy, but I don't like using beans unless I want to raise my deer numbers. And so we've considered trying to raise our deer numbers here in Minnesota, but we're right close to that balance, and I don't want to explode our does and fawns with 12 acres of beans out here. That's a very bad thing. I have a neighbor around here where his beans and corns are, might be at least 50, 60% are being brush hogged in this spring because we didn't have a cold winter. And the deer were all over hitting the greens and not over on the beans and corn. And we have corn here too. And that brings me into corn. What's great about corn is you plant it in the spring. It's more of a November, December food source. They're not eating it during the summer unless you have really excessive deer herd problems, deer number problems, lots of does and fawns. I can remember a client that had about a 5, 6 acre, 7 acre cornfield between swamp and hundreds of acres of alfalfa. Not much cover in that area except for open hardwoods. You get down the swamps, that's where all the does and fawns and bucks for bedding in. They go through that cornfield every single day in and out of that alfalfa, and they just ate that corn down to the ground to where they didn't have an ear left by hunting season. Excessive deer numbers. But that was kind of a problem of habitat, cover, location, and summer food too. But they're passing right through that corn, so they're going to just smash it. We use corn here because we want to establish the base of our plots in August, have that base of greens, brassicas, peas, oats, rye, wheat, vetch, buckwheat, late planted buckwheat. Those are all great for getting deer on your property early and keeping them there for the entire season. Clover is a part of that in our hunting plots. You have that base, and then we have that corn. You just have to have a lot of corn. Here we have 7 acres of corn, 7.5 acres of corn on top of our greens. The greens are what keep the deer here the entire time, and then the corn is that addition. So if we only had 10 acres, I wouldn't plant any corn. It'd all be greens, and it'd be planted in August. Buckwheat. We love planting buckwheat during the summer because it's an incredible soil builder. It's the only plant, and I've tested them all, where you can actually roll over them with tires. We use a Packer Max, which is awesome. And I think by the time you see this, I want to take a chance that Lincoln still has $50 off. Just look for the code in the description. WHS50 that you can buy at Packer Max. He doesn't have sales very often, but bottom line is you can smash it right over with the Packer Max and other things where that buckwheat crimps right over, and then you can plant it into it during the fall. I've been doing that since I established a lawn back in the day in Nebraska in the mid-2000s. Very easy to do. Smash it down, kill it so it doesn't come back up. It's the only complete cover crop, smother crop. And what I mean by that is it smothers the soil just like a canopy of an open hardwoods and doesn't allow anything to grow down at the base. It keeps weeds at bay once established. Great summer. And it's been traditional for decades and decades and decades for a great soil builder before a fall crop of rye, new ag fields, and then you start planting the following year. You can even rotate buckwheat into tillage radish and then go the following year. But buckwheat is a great soil builder. It's a smother crop, holds moisture down by the ground like a greenhouse effect. And because it's a cover crop and staying there all summer, then it helps you combat erosion. It's not a food source. In some areas it is. 10%, 20% of areas, deer will eat it and hit it heavy. And even in the UP of Michigan, because I had 8.5 acres of it during the summer a lot, they didn't touch it. Even when I had half those acres, 4 acres, they didn't touch it. Just on the fringe areas a little bit here and there because it wasn't a quality food source compared to what else they had in their natural habitat. So a great soil builder. Some of the do-all blends, there's some with 15, 20 seeds. This seed is supposed to do this. This seed's supposed to do this. The problem is they don't contribute across the entire field. It's diluted. It's like taking buckwheat as part of a soil builder and only having it at 5%. Well, buckwheat's only going to do what it's supposed to do in that 5%, not the other areas. It's not going to be a smother crop. It's not going to be a greenhouse effect, because a lot of those do-all blends, the deer are going through picking out things they want to eat, like sun hemp. Sun hemp is a pretty cool plant. It goes deep into the soil, brings up nutrients, but if the deer eat it down to the dirt and kill it, it does nothing. So they'll go through and pick what they want to eat, and then you're left with this hodgepodge of weeds, open soil, and some of the stuff left over they didn't want to eat in your field, and you just offer a big mess. That's why buckwheat as a crop by itself is a much better soil builder than a lot of the soil building do-all blends. Bottom line is, if you're planting it and there's a food source during the summer and you have high deer numbers, or you're already at a balance, then you get down to number 6. What's best? What should you plant? Well, we plant corn. That's for November. We plant buckwheat because we're building our soil. We plant clover in the spring. We even have a spring drought attack perennial blend where we're adding an annual rye with the clover to help aid in a nurse crop, no different than adding oats to alfalfa. When you're establishing it in the spring, you have to have that cover crop because we have a good percentage of chicory in there. That aids too. So you at least have a chance. I can tell you last year with the drought, no clover blend in the spring in that drought conditions where we were at least, would have survived or could survive. But we do plant clover sometimes for that hunting plot, and we own a seed company, so if we plant in the spring and it fails because of drought, we'll just replant in the fall with a cover crop. That's why we have our brassica clover blend that we plant, called our dual threat 365, because you plant it, it's a great fall crop, then you have clover as a base going into the following spring. It gets established in the fall, like I talked about. That's a great time. But out of all those, what's best? Well, we plant buckwheat every year. We plant corn every year. But should you even be planting anything at all other than the soil builder like buckwheat or corn? Maybe. What's best? Maybe none. For years I've been teaching, it's time to think that just because it's spring, you don't have to plant something. Get your plots ready. Plant a good solid cover crop. If they eat buckwheat, plant wheat or oats. They don't get very high. They're easier to manage going into the fall. It's at least a cover crop that shades out the ground, avoids and helps you avoid erosion, helps maintain and smother weeds that might be coming in. But if you have high deer numbers, the last thing you want to do is to plant summer crops. Now, if you have a percentage like ours, we're planting about 8 to 10% of our total plots are in a perennial base for hunting plots going into the fall. They're there in the spring, but that's 10% or less, in our case. If you have 3 acres and they're eating down to the dirt, when you're planting summer food, you're only hurting yourself going into the fall. Because for one, those deer are waiting to smash your greens as soon as they pop up in the fall. When you do replant something else, you have that army of does and fawns waiting there. Your food plots last less. You get less per acre. Your volume suffers. And your whole hunting season suffers. Did you buy your land just to plant food plots? Or did you buy your land to plant food plots to help you build a good herd? You have to ask yourself that. And if you have a good herd, you have a good hunt. You can't have a good hunt without a good herd unless you're just waiting for a random to come from your neighbors. I want you to be at a higher level than that. Higher level of success, higher level of deer management, higher level of property management and food plot management. There's a lot more to figure out than just it's spring, we must plant. That's robotic caveman personality and focus. If you have high deer numbers, the worst thing you can do is have a bunch of summer food. So get that out of your head right away. Just look at it. We have high deer numbers. Get rid of the summer food. As the first step in reducing herd numbers. You know how many people we go to that have great habitat? They spend a lot of money on their habitat every single year, but they have too many does and fawns and they don't have enough tags or people to actually shoot those does and fawns. You gotta step backwards. Everyone thinks trigger control for shooting deer and shooting does and reducing deer population. It's actually getting rid of your summer food. And again, it goes back to there's a balance. I want does and fawns on the property. I want them to really start to flood in late September, October, but not August when I'm trying to grow my fall crops. And I want some of those does and fawns to be shared by my neighbors. A lot of properties we go to are just because they spend so much money and they have great habitat, it's a vacuum. It just keeps sucking. They shoot 15 does and fawns out, 15 more does and fawns come back the next year. They have the same number, even though they shoot a whole bunch. Get rid of the summer food. Stop planting in the spring when it comes to actually an attraction during the summer. And not only will your hunting be better, your herd management will be better, but your herd will be better. They don't want to sit during the summer on a 5-acre bean field and you have 18 deer pour out. That's stressful. Let them spread throughout the neighbors' properties. Spread on your neighbor's summer food. They'll be back, especially those mature bucks. The mature bucks that we find live on average a mile to a mile and a half unless you have a contained herd. You have the only cover in the area, you're surrounded by ag land. That's an example of that, where they don't have any other place to go but stay on your land year round. But most places where you share deer and you have borders where deer move about during the summertime, we find that bucks live about a mile to a mile and a half away from the summer ground to their fall grounds. Be the fall grounds, you win. You win for herd management, herd hunting. You can improve sex ratios, improve buck age structure. You can maintain populations and balance with the habitat. You can be the person not only driving a great hunt, but driving a great herd and a healthy herd, because you know when to plant going into the summer, and certainly, like we do, when not to.